All right. So, so this is JavaScript automation of a manual process. So usually when we talk about JavaScript automation, we're talking about automation to evaluate the behavior of another program. That is not what we're talking about here. This is a manual process that was being done for custom reporting that was onerous. It sucked, so we decided to fix it. So we're solving a real client problem. My poor friend contacted me. She said, hey, you're my friend at that company, and I use your product. So help me solve this problem. And I said, well, of course, customer. I'd love to help you have a better experience with our product. So she said, you know, I'm spending half a day doing this manual reporting because your tool does not support this kind of reporting that I want to do. And I said, tell me about the work that you're doing. And I said, oh, I'm totally on board with this because the way you're working is the way I want to work, and we're both testers at this point. And so I wanted to support the kind of work she was doing, and then I could be dogfooding it in my work environment too. So we talked about what does the client actually need. That to me is one of the hardest things because it's easy to say, hey, I've got this hammer. Let's make it look like a nail, and I'm going to pound in the wrong nail or hit my thumb. Who knows what I'm going to do just because I have an idea of what I want to solve. But in reality, I don't necessarily know what the problem is. So a lot of the conversation involved in this talk is about defining the problem that needs to be solved. So Carol and I had some good conversations, and I said, why are we doing this? And she said, I want people to be able to say, have good conversations about software testing. So here we're talking about exploratory testing. Has anyone heard this term? Okay, all right, so exploratory testing is brain on human beings evaluating things. Usually when we talk about testing in programmer context, it's take some code and make it execute other code. That is not what she was interested in doing. That was part of her environment, but that was not her task primarily. So we're talking about wanting to be able to describe the work in a way that was not statistical. All the reporting that she had been asked for and had available to her was very county. She said she wanted to be able to talk about things in a more qualitative way, in a more contextual way. And so what we wanted to do was create something called a mind map as an information radiator. So if you do agile software development, you may have seen big video monitors on the wall, or maybe hand-drawn charts, big sticky note festivals on the wall. Those are all information radiators. Your goal is to make the information just pour out into the audience, and somehow, somewhere, the right eyes will fall on it at the right time. And this is a passion of mine. I don't know much about data visualization, but I do know that I want people to be able to solve the problems that we need to solve. So information radiators, we talked a little bit about. A mind map is a hierarchical graph. Sorry, I'm going to get a little nerdy here because I got a discrete mathematics degree and graph theory is my jam. So anybody remember Tinker Toys? You had this like spoke and a little stick that you could stab into it, another spoke, and you could just like make these big connected things. That's not what we're talking about, but it's close. If you take one of those circles and you jam some things into it, and then you have a rule that you can put one thing at the end of those, and you can't connect them anywhere else. They all have to go toward the middle. And that's hierarchical, right? You might have seen this for like a merge sort or a bubble sort or something where you're talking about a heap management. And so you have a center, and then everything flows down from the center or toward the center, however you want to think about it. So Carol wanted one of these as a custom report. And she said, what I have a lot of is questions like, how many tests passed and failed? Well, if you are an exploratory testing aficionado, exploratory testing doesn't fail. There's not really a concept of pass-fail. It's an investigation task. So like if you ever do spikes for development, anybody use that model? Okay. So it's kind of like that, but all the time. You say, hey, there's something we want to investigate. There's something we want to learn about. We want to know how hard this is, how wrong this is, how confusing this is. Then that would be a prime target for an exploratory testing session. So what she was doing was session-based test management, which broke down the testing activity into observable chunks of tasks. And so test charters and session-based test management might be like a little too technical, but what it gets down to is you find a way to structure the work so that people who don't do that activity can have some sense of where you are. Probably you've done this as a programmer. Somebody said like, hey, what's our progress like? What's the status of this thing? How much more do we have to go? And so you find a way to reflect that in a way that people who don't do that activity can understand. And we all know that estimates are lies that we tell ourselves, but we can at least try to improve the conversation by talking about, these are tasks that I'm going to do, but I don't have to do all of them. I can choose to cut it off anytime. And just like a backlog of work, we can have a backlog of tasks. We can say, these are the highest priority, and we will spend time on those until we run out of time or choose to invest more. So there's more technical stuff that I could get into about those things, but they're in tiny text because it's not the most essential part of the talk for you. So the proposed solution was that we have a bit more to go on than, here's the big work item that the team is processing. We wanted to say something a little bit more about who's doing this task, to be able to see the task at all. And then also to say, like, is it completed? That's kind of useful for people who are trying to track a project or a product, or if you're saying, can we release this thing, then maybe you could see how far along you are. So in the current reporting structure that she had, there was a whole lot of manual clicking through and trying to do processing of information, and she had an idea of how she wanted to represent it. It was just too many steps. So we said, okay, let's look at what you have available to you. This was our semi-automated reporting, our tracer bullet, if you will. We took the simplest thing that could possibly work. We said, where do you get this information? Oh, I download it. Okay, great. Then you get this spreadsheet. Not a very useful thing in and of itself. She had to actually like clean up the columns and like arrange things just so in order to use something we found on the internet, because who doesn't look up code on the internet? I was like, I'm not going to reinvent this. So she had the manual download, she had to manipulate it in a program, then she had to do some kind of scripted processing, and then she had some more manual processing on the other end. And we said, I mean, that's okay, but we can do better than that. But that at least was our prototype of saying, if we get this Python script that this random guy worked on, so G. Poulter, thank you for your contributions to my work, she would still have to manually color this thing, and you can see how large it is. She would have to go manually color code all of this stuff, and there's like icons and like keywords and stuff that she had to go put into that, even after she got it into the format of this thing, which was a big pain in the butt and took her like half a day. So if she wanted to have a better conversation than how many pass-fails did you have, it would be a huge time suck for her. So Amy and I, Wonder Twins, powered up together on this, and we decided to spend our company hackathon improving this customer's experience with our platform. So we took this 5-part manual process and we made it as simple as we could. We said all of that processing that you have to do in other programs, all of that manual encoding that you have to do, we want that to be gone. No more of that, because that is a drag that keeps her from really getting to the point. And she could have spent that time having a real conversation about what to do next, where to go, and actually investing in the work. This was just overhead that was dragging her down. So we said, okay, what we're going to do is come up with a way to take that spreadsheet export that you're dealing with and use a common free mind mapping software. So we talked about the mind map that she was hand coloring, where it had a center and then it kind of flowed out for that. She was manually creating that in this program and then having to maintain it. So instead, we wrote some JavaScript. Now, I don't know how much Node y'all have done, so stop me if you've heard this part. But like I said, Node was the hammer that I had. So Node is actually a C program, not a JavaScript program. It's useful for making your code platform independent. So it takes heavy advantage of modular JavaScript. So it's a platform on which to run your thing. And NPM, Node Package Manager, is a way to go get other people's stuff. So just like I pulled up Greg Poulter's Python script from GitHub, I can use NPM to go browse around and find some different libraries. Now, PSA. Do the world a favor, and when you create your node package, have some kind of guidance for your users to go on, because we said we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Surely there is something that can take a spreadsheet and make it into an XML. It turned out that we were sifting through quite a few different libraries. Not all of them had any kind of documentation of how they were used. Those that did have documentation were often out of date. The ones that we finally ended up picking, we also chose partly because we saw usage statistics on the NPM website. We wanted an active user base. So if no one had downloaded it and the user base was very small, we said this probably isn't getting either enough adoption because it's terrible, or it isn't widely used enough to have community support and have pull requests from its user base to improve it. So we want to get there faster. So do us newbies a favor and give us a manual to read. So you can always say RTFM. And then, so the documentation is big and important for people who've never done this before. And since I'm in that first year of JavaScript, I would appreciate you. So this was our stack that we ended up using. We said, okay, we're going to use NPM, which is Node also. And then we said what we'll do is we'll read in that XLS and we'll transform it into a JavaScript object notation, because that's natively handled and easier to work with. And we can do all kinds of things to JSON that we don't have to deal with either the input format or the output format, because we didn't really actually care about either one of those when we were doing the transformations. We just wanted to deal with the objects in question. And then we had FS Extra to write out files. So, oh right, I should probably pull up the repo. Yeah, not being on my laptop. It's cool. I just need to get to GitHub. Okay. This is an open source project. So as you can see, we have a very simple application here. It's just one JavaScript file. Our dependencies, I put them into the slide, but for those who are new to Node, if you have your dependencies defined within this file, then you can keep them up to date. You can put in which versions you depend on, and then it's a simple one-line command to just install all of your dependencies instead of having to go hunt them all down. So that's convenient and time saver for new people. So when we do npm install and npm run main, you'll have to have Node and npm already on your machine, but otherwise it should take care of itself. So here we have a sample of the input file, and this is the script itself. So let's see, which one is the maximized? Is it this one? Yeah. Okay. So here you can see that we were taking this CSV spreadsheet type input file and reading it in, and building a tree, because FreeMind, which was our mind map reader program, used an XML format. Now we didn't know that offhand, but when we actually looked at samples of her manual work, we could see that there was a pretty formal structure to it, and we were able to write out something very similar. So you have to write on a root node, and then you build onto it from the read-in file. So we started out with the project name as the center, because what we were doing was representing a backlog. So this information was hierarchical in this project management tool, and it was intended, she could do different kinds of filtering before she exported the file. So it could be used for a particular release of a project, or it could be used for a project overall, depending on what she wanted to put into that source file. Then we did some traversal stuff using Lodash. We wanted to reduce to use MapReduce to help us traverse all of this set of information and then build it out into a JSON array which we then built into an XML tree. So this source is online. I'm not going to try to go through every command because that doesn't entertain me. But if you have questions, you know where to find me, and you can submit issues to my GitHub repo if you find bugs. That would be awesome. But the part that was interesting for our client was not just that we could build this thing, but that we could encode things for her. Because remember, she was able to use that Python script to build out this mind map, but she had to go do a lot of manual processing even after she had that. So here she could say, okay, for my backlog items, I have different statuses, and I want to color code those things. So that for her was a time saver. All right. So at this point, we reduced her time suck from hours and like half a day down to under a minute. She was actually able to do this reporting faster than she could do the native reporting. Once she had done the filtering, it was a quick hop over to the format that she preferred so that she could have conversations with her management that really mattered to her. So we achieved parity with her existing manual process at this point. But there was a separate export of the detailed task level information that was not represented in that initial export. So we started a second branch. This feature branch was about pulling in that task level information, but in order to do that, since we had two separate import files, we needed to traverse our tree and then decorate it appropriately, and we had no guarantee that the data would not have changed in between. So this is still a work in progress, and if you love open source, we're here for you. So please join us as contributors. We would love to have your eyes on it, and it's an easy way to get into JavaScript Node. So here's an example of that second export file that needs to be processed. So you have these different kinds of work items and a description and a lot of things that are metadata that she may or may not care about, but this is the native export format. So just like with the original export, she had to do a lot of processing to winnow out those things that didn't matter to her. It would be nice to not have to do that here. So even with our current solution of only getting as far as she had been able to get before, our client was very grateful. She had a great experience working with us, and it was a wonderful introduction to Node for me. So I highly recommend trying to find a real-world problem to solve, because once you know why you're doing something, it's a lot easier to wrap your head around it, and you don't get distracted by the tech stack focus as much because you have a very specific purpose to fulfill. So that's all I had for you. This is the GitHub repo, so feel free to take a look at it. It's work item mind map under A clarification on GitHub. So thanks very much for having me. Oh yeah, questions, comments, peanut gallery. Just like you would, she had Node and NPM on her local machine while she got her team to help her set up the machines where they wanted to run it. And then she was able to run those two commands and just get it going. So you clone it down from GitHub and then run those two commands. Yeah, so we didn't package it up any other than how GitHub works. Yeah, we kept it simple as possible. And since we only had 5 days to do this, we had already done the initial discovery, like the Python scripting solution that we had found. We talked over Skype a while on that one. The world is ending now, so I think I better get off the stage. So, all right, I'm in a JavaScript meetup. That was very clever of you. All right, any other questions? I'm doing this at Connect Tech in the fall, so this is just a preview. I think that the video will be online. My slides will go through a metamorphosis until 5 minutes before I present, so presumably I will post them at that point. Yeah. I think she knew how to manipulate things in Excel. She's a software tester who can hit APIs with tools. So she knew how to write structured communication. She knew how to run something at the command line, but not necessarily this tech stack. So she also, very key, had the support of a team. She was not flying solo. So this was in service of the team's goals. So it was not just her working alone. So that might make a difference in the way that you would structure the information for your client to consume. I didn't have to do any lessons in how scripting works. We were able to talk it through together. And she had support, boots on the ground where she was. So I think that helps. And just anyone who has more clue than you do is really awesome to have. So, and speaking of people who have more of a clue, Andrew, who's one of the organizers of this meetup, was one of my mentors. So thanks to him. I don't think he made it tonight. But.
So was the script, was it written in Excel file?
Yeah, so the program, the backlog management program, had an export feature that was intended for business users. So it kept it in a format that would be Excel-friendly. So I think it was actually CSV, but it had weird header stuff going on that you would expect in an Excel file. So we had to do a lot of like trimming to just try to get the basic CSV that we cared about, and then read that in, manipulate it as JavaScript objects, form them relationships that we derived from the different metadata that was in the columns, and then decorate those nodes in the way that she wanted to. So coloring was one way that she was visually representing information. FreeMind also has things like you can set fonts, you can set icons, you can put live links in there. So she has other things that she'd like to do to it. But even that parity with the manual reporting that she was doing was still better than having her boss ask her for the number of pass-fail counts that didn't actually map to the work that was really happening, because it was just the traditional way of doing things. And so she wanted to drive better business conversations about risk management and task management and be able to prioritize in a way that mattered. And instead of just saying, are we done before the deadline, say, well, we did everything that was high priority. And there's always more to do. You never run out of things to do. Yes? Okay. So that is a good question. So what is the conversation around this artifact? So if we look at this, green, I believe, means good. Red means bad. Gray means we don't care enough to do anything about it, probably. That's the assumption. So what we're looking at here is not as much coverage as you might think. Depending on what someone said, they may have said, test everything. And this is saying, we are explicitly not going to do that. This is a choice we made for the purpose of shipping. Are you okay with that? Because focusing on the thing that you want to enhance now doesn't mean that you didn't affect all the other things that already exist. You don't know what the effects on those things are necessarily. If you don't look, you definitely don't know. So you can assume that it didn't change, or you can find out whether it changed. But you don't have to do any testing. The easiest possible thing is just hand it over. Don't test it. Just see what happens. You don't get to keep as many clients that way. But if speed is all you care about, then quality may not be. Features may not be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Now people don't like to hear we hope it works, right? So when I look at this visual, I agree. The areas where it's green are where the most effort has been concentrated. The areas that are most gray are the areas we totally ignored. So hopefully the bottom right side of this map is not critical features. If it is, then we may want to invest, and that's an excellent conversation to be spurred by this. If you get pass-fail numbers, instead of something like this that puts the work in context, you don't necessarily see what you're not looking at. You only see, well, we looked at something. You told us this list, and we said okay, But that also means that there's a trade-off of ignoring the other things. So let's have a real conversation about the full risk of this, the scope of this work, and are we actually providing the weighting to the feature set in a way that manages the risk. Now, you don't have to manage risks through testing. It is an effective way to do it. A lot of people do. That's why there's a whole industry of people like me who have been doing this 14 years. But there are other ways. You can say to users in your training, do not wander off the path. You can say, Facebook is free, and if you do something that we don't support, sorry, just doesn't work. All of your family photos have been trashed. That's life. So, any other questions? Yeah.
How specific on your product is what you did? How specific like this is like for the work that you guys do, you know, to be a large company, what can be done to roll it into your actual application?
We did talk about that. So we, the development team, felt that this kind of reporting would be a valuable pattern for other clients. So we happened to have a very enthusiastic early adopter who was willing to work through the pain with us and do early testing. It was great. And she had a complex data set, which meant we couldn't do the simplest thing that possibly could work. We had to do something that would solve the real world problem. So we didn't have the facile example that I included in here because obviously client data. But we made a case in our hackathon presentation that we had a similar pattern of a spoke and hub visualization in one part of the application. And we did some investigation during those 5 days into what it would take to build that in D3. Now, I don't know the D3 tech stack. My co-developer did not know it either, but she did more of the investigation, so I can't really represent that process fairly. But what I can say is that we made a strong case saying, this is a test with a real client in a real situation. We have a lot of different kinds of very data specific, counting specific reporting, and this would be a different pattern that we might look into more qualitative analysis that could help our clients explore a new way of looking at their work. And we already had a precedent for that in this one particular visualization. And we thought perhaps we could expand that hub and spoke design to be more of a mind map. And maybe it's represented slightly differently. Maybe you have to go dig into those different parts. Where when Carol was showing this off, she wanted to explode it and show the level of detail. But that's not the only way you can use a mind map. You can collapse it down and dig into it. Really what it gets down to is the thing that your business people are going to love the most. It's a bullet point list. And in fact, FreeMind can export it as a bullet point list. So that was an advantage for her. She could provide an outline to her business that could include information about like time spent or the emphasis that it had. And so it could become a business presentable thing instead of a graphical representation because of this free tool set that we were using. So we did consider that this would have potential business value for our employer, and we did represent that as an outcome of our hackathon. But as with all features, it has to get prioritized in the backlog, and so we can't necessarily make that decision in a vacuum. Yeah. So this was a great experience of collaborating with the business and the customer to find a solution that would be effective in changing one person's life and potentially carry over to other customers. Thanks very much.